Hello, my lovely anatomists and physiologists. Michele Glass here. And I know we've been here before, so we already have some notes on the central nervous system. I wanted to just do a couple quick reminders, and then we're going to move straight into the peripheral nervous system. So we've been spending all this time on chapter 13, really getting into the anatomy of the central nervous system. And remember, when we talk about the CNS, we mean the brain and we mean the spinal cord. And when we talk about the brain, remember, we talked about basically 4 key structures. So we talked about the cerebrum, we talked about the diencephalon, we talked about the brain stem, and then we talked about the cerebellum. And remember, for brainstem, we talked about pons, midbrain, I should say midbrain, and then pons if I go from top to bottom. And then don't forget your medulla oblongata. When we talked about diencephalon, we talked about thalamus primarily and hypothalamus. So let's keep up with those. We talked also about the spinal cord. So we looked at its anatomy real briefly, but we did pay attention to the gray matter and the white matter. And remember, we had the terminology for all of the gray matter in both the brain and the spinal cord. We referred to it as nuclei. And then we talked about those myelinated axons, that white matter, as being a tract, right? So what we're going to do next in our conversation is move into the peripheral nervous system. And when we talk about the peripheral nervous system, of course, we can abbreviate this as the PNS. And when we're talking about the peripheral nervous system, we still have our gray matter and our white matter. And our gray matter, we're going to talk about this in terms of ganglia, which is the plural form of the word, or ganglion is singular. And we'll get into some examples of this in our next chapter, I expect, and definitely when we move into our next semester. Remember, gray matter, by definition, is our collection of neuron cell bodies or somas. And we should think about these as little processing or integration centers. So even though we kind of introduced first the idea of the peripheral nervous system as a system of transmission, we will see some processing and integration is occurring here. But mostly we think about the peripheral nervous system in terms of the white matter, which we know are myelinated axons. All the axons of the peripheral nervous system are myelinated because we're going, y'all, from the brain stem out to the body, from the spinal cord out to the body. We have to go potentially from the spinal cord all the way out to the big toe. So we need those transmissions to go as fast as possible. And myelinating our axons, remember, really speeds up that propagation. And we are talking here, when we talk about the white matter of the peripheral nervous system, we're talking about our nerves. And so that's really the conversation that we're going to be having a little more of here. When we talk about our nerves, we're going to see we can divide them up based on where they come off. So we have cranial nerves and we have spinal nerves. Cranial nerves, by definition, come off of the brain or brain stem. So somewhere like cerebrum or brainstem. And we're going to see we have 12 pairs. These are all assigned a name and a number. And we'll be learning that as part of our lab work. With our cranial nerves, they can be sensory nerves, meaning only sensory information is traveling. They can be motor nerves, meaning only motor information is traveling, or they can be mixed. And a mixed nerve is going to have both sensory and motor information traveling on the nerve. Okay, when we look at our spinal nerves, we're going to see 31 pair of spinal nerves, and they're all mixed, meaning sensory and motor information both is traveling on the nerve. Now we're going to name our spinal nerves based on where they branch off of the spinal cord, and the regions of the spinal cord are being named based on the vertebral column. So we actually name our spinal nerves based on the vertebral column. And so we're going to actually have, and just to be clear, the numbers I'm going to present here are in pairs. So instead of saying 8 pairs, I'm just going to say 8 cervical. We're going to have, and maybe I should put pairs out here then. Maybe that makes more sense on this side. We're going to have 12 thoracic. We're going to have 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, and 1 coccygeal. And remember, it needs to add up to be 31 pair, right? Now remember, we had 7 cervical vertebrae, 12 thoracic vertebrae, and 5 lumbar vertebrae. So those numbers can be fairly easy. But notice here that we have 8 cervical because you have a pair that branches above C1, which is our atlas, and a pair below C1, which again is our atlas. So that actually gives us 7. Excuse me, that gives us 8 cervical spinal nerves instead of 8 pair of cervical spinal nerves instead of 7. Let me introduce one other term, and then we'll start looking a little bit at that nerve anatomy. So if we pick out this other term that we're going to see quite a lot, plexus. And this term is talking about where axons from different spinal nerves come together. Or another way we can talk about this is networks of nerve fibers. And here I think it's fair to think of nerve fiber and axon as talking about the same thing. In our lab, we've studied the brachial, well, the cervical plexus. So that's the network of nerve branching up into the head and neck. We studied the brachial plexus. So that's the nerve network coming out into the upper appendage. And then we also studied both the lumbar and sacral plexus. And so that's how we're getting that terminology. Last thing I want to pick up on here is the basic structure of a nerve. So a nerve, remember, is a bundle of myelinated axons. And we should expect this. This pattern should become like a regular part of our expectation, that anytime we're going to be looking at an organ or a structure, we're going to have some connective tissues that are going to be wrapping around that structure, organizing it, making it separate, but then also connecting it into the body. So we have actually 3 layers of connective tissue. We have the epineurium, the perineurium, and the endoneurium. So here our epineurium is the outermost connective tissue. Our outermost connective tissue. And then what we see is we have inside the nerve your fascicle, which is actually the bundles of axons inside the nerve. Think of skeletal muscle, same sort of organization. So you should be able to picture that based on your study of your skeletal muscle. So the perineurium then is going to wrap around the fascicle And then the endoneurium is going to surround individual myelinated axons. So the other thing to keep in mind when we do talk about a nerve is it's the bundle of myelinated axons, as we've said, but let's also say it's the connective tissue, which we've highlighted here as the epineurium, perineurium, and endoneurium. And then the third component of a nerve, there's going to be some blood vessels going to our nerves. All right, we have one video remaining to wrap up chapter 13. Stay tuned. As always, take care of yourselves and each other.